Hello everyone, how are you going? Welcome to the Anglosphere Is Inevitable, something that we have seen before in the form of CANZUK and other Commonwealth conglomerates mixed in with other countries, but really, when you were talking about international politics to this scale, it certainly helps to have an updated and a second opinion.
The Anglosphere is inevitable. As you might have been able to tell from some of my more in-depth videos on the subject and some of the memes that have been going around, I'm very optimistic of Britain and the greater English-speaking world's future. Whether we're speaking of CANZUK, a closer imperial union-style state, or simply a tighter friendship between Britain, the Commonwealths, and the United States. And I've often heard hesitation to lump the US into this Anglosphere grouping, largely on account of its almost certain domineering role in said group. However, the US is undoubtedly an essential part of Britain and the Commonwealth's strategy for a long-term success, and it would tremendously benefit them to keep the US as their foremost partner. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. We all know of the tremendous heights Britain once reached, the age of the globe-spanning empire. Today, Britain retains disunited fragments of that in the form of its settler colonies like Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, whose economies, populations, cultures, and standards of living are nearly identical, sharing a singular root, but now standing largely separated from one another across 3 continents.
And there's really not much you can do about that because, well, it's just a distance-based thing, and that is one of the major hurdles that prevents anything like this from just becoming a very easy reality, you know? There's a reason that it's the UK, but to have a united world to that degree, you're just going, okay, well, we need just better shipping or just different travel because, well, for so many of these countries, they're going to be then competing with one another, you know? Australia's exports and Canada's exports are virtually the same thing, you know? We just export straight to China and Canada services the USA in itself and probably all of Europe as well. However, I do think that a major roadblock for something like this ever happening is the fact that, like they said, these countries are already so similar. They share so many things from health expectancy to data, let alone all the manufacturing and even just people moving around. You know, it's already pretty easy for those populations to shift around however you need between these 4/5 countries. And so really, you only ever see a unity of countries to this degree when there is an absolute necessity for it because there is so much black tape and red mark around it that it just makes it so impossible unless you have something like a world war. And, well, we don't really have something like that just yet.
The separation of Britain from the European Union has opened the door and highlighted the need to forge closer and dependable partnerships with compatible states. Alone, Britain stands isolated on the continent and highly vulnerable if ever the continental Europeans were to become hostile either economically or militarily. In Oceania, Australia and New Zealand find themselves increasingly overshadowed by the economic and military giant of China, not to mention the rising Indonesia even closer by. Since the Cold War, the United States has taken up a valuable role as a defense and trade partner to this pair of Commonwealth nations. However, a desire to not become overly dependent upon the US, whose population, culture, and economy was both notably distinct and domineering, meant this alliance could only go so far. A similar case exists for Canada, though to a lesser degree. Its proximity to the United States has caused it to become overshadowed by its richer, stronger, and more densely populated southern neighbor. While American culture is certainly more compatible with Canadian culture than that of Australia, Canadian governing traditions, economics, and lifestyles are still far closer to those of Britain, Australia, and New Zealand than to the United States.
The fact that Canada has somehow managed to form its own lane when it is so easily overshadowed by the USA is beyond me. I mean, they definitely do, like you said, just share so much in common compared to a lot of other European countries as well. And of course, it definitely helps just maintaining that direct connection to the crown as well. But really, you are one contiguous piece of land that is very, very common overall. And so the fact that the USA and Canada aren't really just one country is always just beyond so much of the rest of the world. However, coming back to the problem that the UK has, though, certainly complicates the entire situation. I must admit, I've never considered the fact that Greater Europe may just turn against the UK. I mean, especially considering they kind of just went, well, bye. It certainly cements the idea that there is not a direct friendship here anymore. I mean, in the same sentence, you can definitely identify the fact that these countries all really love each other between the Euro and even just the fact that Greater Europe wants the UK just to get through to the USA, especially those countries over on the eastern side, for instance. But then once again, you come full circle and the USA just continues to dominate the entire arrangement. And so if you have the 4 countries, they're 2 separated and there's just so many other complicated factors. But then if you include a kind of mitigating factor and add 5, then it just becomes 1 again.
While American culture is certainly more compatible with Canadian culture than that of Australia, Canadian governing traditions, economics, and lifestyles are still far closer to those of Britain, Australia, and New Zealand than to the United States, where these matters alone can vary greatly from state to state. Clearly, the breakup of the empire has left its surviving fragments as lesser pieces of a once greater whole. And even if only on a small scale, each country recognizes this and has attempted to recapture some of the old strengths they once held as a union, be it through the establishing of joint intelligence sharing networks, collaborating on military matters, and pursuing closer trade relationships with one another. Since Britain left the EU, these efforts appear to have accelerated and may, within our lifetimes, produce something close to a revitalized British Empire or a new Anglo-Union. of which Canada is almost certain to become the central hub for.
Yeah, honestly, when you truly do just look at the map of the world, you go, these countries could not be further apart, and that is why Britain originally had them, because they had their fingers in all areas of the globe, but they also had India and so many other places like we saw in Africa, and so unless you were somehow able to just add South Africa into this mix just to kind of put a bottom puzzle piece in there, at least then everyone would be kind of equidistant, and you would then just expanding even more, just including different continents, but it really does become such a scale of economy. You're just going, how can we possibly just ship everything that we need to make this worthwhile around? And I guess that is actually one of the major differences between an empire back then and an empire now. You know, yes, they were trading, let's say, through India and Africa and so many different parts of the world, but there was also a major aspect of it that was just about the expansion and just claiming land all over the world, and that just isn't a thing anymore. You know, we have satellites and we can see the whole world. There is not exploration like that to any degree.
Of which Canada is almost certain to become the central hub for, as it alone can easily interact with Australia and New Zealand on one coast while interacting with Britain on the opposite coast. A united Anglosphere would stand as the largest country on the planet, one rich in resources, industry, and technology. Its economy would be the third or fourth largest in the world, behind the US, China, and the EU if you were to include them as a single economic unit.
Crazy.
Its population would rank within the global top 10 and could be expected to rise significantly alongside its GDP. The United States has long been a part of the international collaborative efforts between the Anglosphere countries, and while it's unlikely to officially join such a union, there's no doubt a partnership will exist between the AS and US as a natural continuation of the long-held special relationship first established during the Great Wars. The US is clearly demonstrating exhaustion as the sole global superpower and evidently lacks confidence in China or Russia to fill that role, while the EU has thus far lacked tremendous interest in anything outside of regional politics.
That is a big call to be making, but to be fair, there is certainly many roads that point to Rome in that regard, just saying the USA is just exhausted of being the world's superpower, which is interesting to think about because their entire mantra and their entire economy is just driven by that, and so if they don't have that, then do they just fall off the brink of the earth or the map, or just what happens there? Do they actually then need a massive kind of world superpower like this to then restart that entire growth? Like, it's so complicated. This kind of international politics, I would not want to be at the round table for that. Something that did catch me off guard though was apparently the fact that there was 140 or nearly 140 million people living in those four countries. Really? I guess no way. Like, that means that the UK has to have like 90 million, and it doesn't. As what? Even if we rounded to the closest 5 million, you got, let's say, 40 million plus 25 million, so 65 million plus 70 million. Oh wow, so that's 135 million, and then plus 5 million, so it is 140 million people. Wow, I never would have expected there to be 140 million people between these four countries, because everyone knows that they're just sparsely populated, but I guess in comparison to some, they are very underpopulated, but overall they do add up to a sizable figure.
The US is clearly demonstrating exhaustion as the sole global superpower and evidently lacks confidence in China or Russia to fill that role, while the EU has thus far lacked tremendous interest in anything outside of regional politics. Thus, who better to alleviate that strain than the original global hegemon of Britain and its commonwealths? Even if the Anglosphere doesn't fully replace the United States as the sole global superpower, its multi-continental presence almost guarantees that it will play a major role in the global balance of power, and its tremendous wealth, population, size, and existing nuclear arsenal assure it the title of a superpower existing among others.
I mean, in a way, it just sounds completely ridiculous because depending on the perspective you take, you go, okay, well, they could be an international superpower. Meanwhile, you're just competing with the USA going, they already are, and they are one country and two land masses, or three land masses if you want to include Hawaii. And so you're just going, what kind of chance do you have compared to China and Russia and the USA? You got the three big dogs, which are literally big, and then Canada and Australia, all are also big, but they just do not have the same sort of backing. However, I do find it very strange that when he is talking about the USA showing signs of exhaustion about being a global superpower, and I guess for that matter also the global currency, really in the same sentence he then goes on to say that they lack confidence about China and Russia taking up that mantle, and I don't think there's any confidence lacking at all. It's a fear of them taking the mantle, not a confidence of lacking. As Leica was saying, that is what their entire mantra is built upon, just having the biggest GDP and the most military and the most of this and the most that. I mean, for goodness sake, even the patriotism that is involved in the USA, just going, we are the best, we are America, USA, all that kind of stuff, it just ingrained in them, and so to not have that anymore, what does that mean to the entire kind of psychology of an entire country? And so obviously all we can really do for now is just sit here and wait while the big wigs just make their decisions, just planning into the future, going, what will we need in 5, 10, 15 years from now? Is this something that is going to be detrimental or very effective in just growing everything that we needed to? And really, that is a very difficult decision to make. And so regardless of whether you're going, yes, let's do it, or no, please don't do it, there is a lot of changes ahead.